be talking about the rigid mindset. So the rigid mindset is mindset number 4 in the book. And the rigid mindset is all about extreme behaviors. So if you look at things on a continuum, either side of the curve is what we call the extreme elements. And whenever we're in an extreme element, it tends to be rigid. It's very all or nothing. Rigidity is defined by only having access to certain things. So under a rigid eating plan, you would only be allowed certain things, very similar to deprivation mindset. Rigid mindset is difficult to function under because people that have a rigid relationship with food tend to have a rigid relationship with life. And dieting, traditional dieting with its restriction, it promotes rigidity. Rigidity is you're either on the diet or you're off the diet. There's really not a whole lot of wiggle room. And what we know is anything that is rigid tends to break under pressure. So imagine that I have a very rigid stick in front of me. It's extremely rigid. If I apply a little bit of pressure to that stick, what happens? It's going to snap because there's no room for it to bend. Rigidity does not allow for diversity. Rigidity does not allow for what life tends to give us a lot of, which is curveballs. And so when we have a rigid plan or a rigid relationship around food or anything for that matter, what tends to happen because of the nature of life is that we'll be going along feeling like we're doing okay, and then something comes up, something that requires that we can't do things the way the diet requires, and we go off the diet because we can't function under extreme circumstances. We can't function with diversity. This looks like somebody who is doing some kind of restrictive dieting, and maybe they go on vacation, or there's a holiday, or somebody comes into town unexpectedly and asks them, hey, you want to go grab a piece of pizza? Well, under a rigid diet, the answer has to be no, because pizza's not allowed on the diet. And so the person either loses out on life, loses out on an opportunity to connect, or they have to come off their diet or their meal plan in order to allow for that experience to occur. When we're not rigid, when we're malleable, and we apply pressure, imagine I had a reed or a rod that was really bending. If I apply pressure to it, it just bends, and eventually it can come back. You see, we don't have to break it. It doesn't have to end. Much like when you have a relationship with food that's flexible, you don't have to go on or off any kind of program or diet. You simply change the way that you relate to food in that circumstance to accommodate what's going on in that moment. And the rigidity that we see around food ends up going into other aspects of our life. People that say no to food a lot tend to say no to life. They say no to relationships. They say no to opportunity. They say no to growth, to change, to things that actually make life go on, make life rich, make life worth meaning, have meaning rather. And by saying no to all of that, life becomes very small. It becomes very, very small, much like the allowed list in certain restrictive dieting. Not a whole lot on that list. Much like not a whole lot in the life of somebody who's an extremely rigid dieter or functions from a rigid place. The way out of rigidity is to look for balance. It's not to go over to the other side, where everything is allowed and everything is coming in with no capacity to stop it, but rather it's looking for that middle path I talk about. You know, there's an old fable, the tortoise and the hare. And in that fable, the tortoise and the hare are in a race. And the tortoise goes as slow as a turtle knows to go. And the hare, this rabbit, goes super, super fast. And what happens is everybody reading that story thinks that the hare is going to win the race. But you know who wins in the end? It's the tortoise. And the reason is because that hare that's running fast, fast, fast eventually gets so tired that he breaks down and takes a nap on the side. Meanwhile, the tortoise, who's going the moderate path, he ends up winning because it's slow and steady wins the race.